Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. This particular video will be going over my latest used book finds from bookstores and a number of really interesting things and sort of an eclectic mix. But first of all are these three rather nice condition copies of original Ian Fleming James Bond novels in the iconic US 1960s Signet paperbacks that I love so much. And of course, I found these literally just after I finished edited and uploaded my video on my Ian Fleming collection of James Bond novels and went over all my Signet copies. So again, I went over these in great detail in that video, but I'll just run through them here. I just picked these up because the price was incredibly cheap, and the condition of these is all really excellent. So here, of course, is Casino Royale, the original James Bond novel, the first of the series, and it's US 60 Signet paperback form with the nice bold yellow background. Again, really nice condition on this particular copy. It's an earlier edition as it doesn't have the 007 Pages logo on the front. The spine is in really good shape. But of course, it is the slightly revised rear cover because it does include Ian Fleming's death date in 1964. But it does have the earlier layout and color, and it does have the earlier picture of Fleming that was used. So it's in that transitional period between the early Signet copies in the 60s and the slightly later Signet copies in the 60s. The red edge pages are in really nice shape. There's not very much browning on the inside. It is credited as a 20th printing. So this is just a nice condition copy for me to add to my collection. And again, there's so many variations in the US Signet paperbacks to begin with that when you really get into collecting these, you kind of have to have multiple copies of what seems like the same book on the surface, but there are a number of variations. Here is the U.S. Signet for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but unlike my other copy, the actual blurb hasn't worn off with the passage of time. So you can see the blurb advertising the first time in paperback. Other than that, there is a little bit of wear and tear, but again, it's in really nice shape. And all of these were priced at less than $1 at the used bookshop. So I was like, you don't find clean Signet copies of Bond novels for that cheap. You just never do. So it was a no-brainer for all three of these. Spine's in rather nice shape too, and you have the black top for the Signet spine. The rear is customized, as this was more of because the Bond series had gotten so large by this point, and OHMSS had been successful in hardback that it coming to paperback, it was touted as more of an event, as was You Only Live Twice and The Man with the Golden Gun. So the last three books have slightly spiffier jackets, and they aren't done in the exact same design as the rest of the series was. So it's got a little bit of wear, but it's in rather nice shape, and it is credited as a 6th printing. Same thing for You Only Live Twice here. This is a nice upgrade for my copy that's got unfortunately, it's perfect other than the fact it's got a big tear in the cover here. So there's a big white splotch where the cover was torn. So this was a nice find. And again, it has custom art sort of advertising this as a much more of an event for it coming to paperback. Spine matches. And then the rear, again, touting itself more boldly, and then the red advertising hype for the final novel, The Man with the Golden Gun, coming soon. The pages are in decent shape. There's a little bit of fading on the bottom of the red edge there. It's credited as a first printing in July 1965 for its paperback edition, so this matches my other copy. And then because I'm a sucker for movie tie-ins, I found a number of interesting movie tie-in and movie novelization paperbacks. So here is an interesting case of you have the French Connection 2 paperback, which is very uncommon. It's a rather nice condition copy, written by the original author of the French Connection, Robin Moore, this time with Milton Matchlin. But it's essentially, from what I gather, it is telling the story of the film sequel, and of course the original novel came out, the film was based on that, so it's sort of following this trail that was picked up by the film and then the film sequel, and then this is more of a novelization of the film French Connection 2. As far as I gather, I don't think it was an original novel first. So it's going to be really interesting to read because I'm hoping it fills in some of the gaps and things that aren't explained in the film, which I do feel the film is underrated. Gene Hackman's performance is great. Of course, I'm a giant John Frankenheimer fan. It's not a perfect sequel. It's definitely not as good as the original film, but it's got great moments in it, and the ending is absolutely fantastic. There's great ideas in it, so I'm really interested to read the book of the film. So this is a Dell copy. Spine's got a little wear, and it is definitely a little bent sideways, but other than that, it's in rather nice shape, and this was literally dirt cheap. It's got green edged pages, which is very common for Dell paperbacks, and it is a first printing from 1975 to tie in with the film's release. You get a nice picture of Gene Hackman's iconic Popeye Doyle, again from the climax of the film. Then here is a movie tie-in for the novel Cross of Iron, which of course is done to tie in with the Sam Peckinpah classic film, which is probably the last really great Peckinpah film. After the point of this film, after that in his career, everything else was just, it never quite lived up to the sort of standard that you would expect from a Peckinpah picture. So Cross of Iron is generally viewed as like the last film that he made that had real greatness to it, and so I've always been interested in reading the book it was based on. So here is a nice tie-in copy. This is printed by Bantam. It's definitely a little worn, but it's just a nice, inexpensive paperback with some stills from the film to tie in. Of course, this came out in 1977 to match the film's release. Next up are 3 direct movie tie-in novelizations, all ironically for 1997 film releases. So here I have the novelization for Air Force One, Alien Resurrection, and Conspiracy Theory, and I'm interested in reading all of these. Again, I am sort of a geek for movie novelizations. Of course, I made a whole video on my collection of various tie-in paperbacks, but I always find it interesting, particularly when authors take it upon themselves to really advance material and either fix things or include a lot of material that was not in the film or build upon things we don't see in the film. And of course, some were written by truly great authors and authors who became a real old hand at this and really infused their own style and put a lot of extra effort into what is generally regarded as definitely not high literature, and really more of a cash grab or just translating the script of a film into book form. But there is a real art to making a novelization effective and engaging, even if you already have seen the film. So I'm interested in looking at these. Again, so here's the one for Air Force One. It's got some embossing of the title, which is always nice. It's in decent shape, and again, I always glance around for tie-ins and novelizations and used bookshops and whatever catches my eye and also has a cheap price tag on it and isn't totally beat up. I'll give most anything a shot. I haven't seen the film in a while, but I have always enjoyed it, even though it is definitely a little bit on the trying to think of the right word. Not quite hokey, but there is like a little bit of inherent goofiness here and there. Then I've never been big on the Alien sequels, and of course they do have their fans, but they do have a lot of issues, and particularly 3 and 4. 3 had the very troubled production, and has multiple different cuts now, and 4 was not an easy production either, and went through a long production process. But I was interested to read this because the novelization is written by A.C. Crispin, who wrote the really excellent Han Solo trilogy in the Star Wars Expanded Universe of The Paradise Snare, The Hutt Gambit, and Rebel Dawn. If you've never read those, they were a huge inspiration and definitely ripped off in parts for the not very impressive Solo standalone film that Disney made. So I always recommend those books to anyone wanting to get into the Star Wars Expanded Universe. They're excellent. So I'm interested to see what she did with the story of Alien 4, because I'm hoping I will enjoy this more than I did the actual film. Again, I've never been a big fan of the Alien franchise, and really outside of the first film, I like things in the first film, I like things in the second film, but outside of that, I've just never been into the rest of the whole Alien universe. So this is from Warner Books, and again, done to tie in with the film. So these are just cheap paperbacks. They will almost always have a little bit of browning by this time, and it's definitely crazy to think that 1997 is now quite a long ways off from where we are in 2021. So seeing books like this and seeing how they've already turned this level of brown at this time, it definitely rubs that fact in. So here is the novelization for Conspiracy Theory, which I just revisited for the first time, oh gosh, I think since it came out. I remember we rented it when it came out on video, and I hadn't seen it since then. And I've been revisiting Richard Donner's filmography since his unfortunate passing this year. And it does have some it is kind of underrated and kind of forgotten. There is some good stuff in there, but it does have a number of story issues, particularly the ending, which I felt was really underwhelming. So I'm interested to check out the novelization, to see if it does anything different or fills in some of the gaps, or has any notable differences. Spine. In the rear, and it has this original store sticker on it, which I can't tell if that's Media Play or Hastings, but definitely looks like one of the two. And when I can't work off stickers like that, it does give me a sort of feeling of nostalgia for the fact that obviously somebody went into a bookstore back in '97 and bought this off the shelf. And speaking of that, inside I found a rather interesting little trinket of that exact story. As with all used books, you never know what random oddities you'll find inside, usually a bookmark or a receipt. It's always interesting seeing a receipt from, say, Walden Books in the mid 90s and seeing, when somebody bought it, say September 1st, 1997 or something. But inside here, I found something rather interesting, and I just want to show it because it's just a fun little thing that was, literally stuck halfway between the book and obviously forgotten and used as a bookmark. And I looked, I don't see anything in terms of personal information, so I think it's okay to show. But this is seemingly the printed itinerary of somebody's flight. Apparently, they bought this book for their flight to Toronto, and then later in September, they wound up going to London and then coming back to Nashville, so round trip. Obviously, maybe somebody's vacation or business trip or something, but this was literally stuck in there. So this is September 1997. So obviously, they picked this up at a bookstore to have something to read on the plane, which is, of course, something I still do. I always read on planes. I have to do something, and I can't sleep on a plane, and I definitely can't listen to music over the engine noise. So I always wind up reading something, whether I'm in an airport or on a plane. So I just thought that was a cute thing to show, and it was still stuck in this particular copy. So there's a little bit of page bending, but I'm not going to complain at all because this was just a literally dirt cheap copy for a quarter, actually. This was a totally random find. This is a novel entitled From the Ashes, based around the film Terminator Salvation. I've never really gotten into the later Terminator films. I've seen the original two many times. I've seen the third one once or twice, but I never felt the need to go watch Salvation or Genesis or any of the other ones that have come along. I still find the franchise interesting, but really it's just the first two films for me, and that's all that's all I need to know about. But I was interested stumbling across this because, of course, Timothy Zahn is a legend in the world of Star Wars. Especially for the Thrawn trilogy, starting with Heir to the Empire in 1991, that basically kickstarted the real expanded universe, and that book really started a new groundswell of Star Wars fandom, and in the time period where there was no Star Wars material. So Zahn's contributions in Star Wars are enormous, and so I've always wanted to read more of his other non-Star Wars work, and then lo and behold, I find that he wrote a novel in the world of the Terminator, based around the Salvation film. So apparently this is one of two novels that he wrote in this series, so I'm interested if, I like this one, I will seek out the other one, but it was just an interesting thing. I had no clue that he had any association with the Terminator franchise in any way. So I guess I will have to finally see Salvation to, in order to make more sense out of this novel. The cover itself, it's got this nice, attractive image of a Terminator, a skull on it. The title is a little embossed, but other than that, it looks nice enough, and it's got stylization to match the whole look of a Terminator book, I suppose. Other than that, it's just pretty standard inside. So of course, it was published in 2009 to tie into the film's release. And then last of this particular genre, I found this really awesome find of the fourth book of original novels created and written for the iconic classic Avengers series. So this one is volume 4, entitled Heil Harris. And I'd actually forgotten about these, that there are a number of Avengers novels that are apparently all original stories. I think they are, or at least some might be adaptations of some of the episodes. But I think they're all in this matching style. It's got a little wear and some cover creasing, but again, I just was shocked to find this just kicking around a bargain used book bin. So I was like, yes, you've got my you've got my sense for this. Because if I find books for less than $1 or less than 50 cents, and it's something, really interesting like this that you just don't see every day, it's like, okay, yes, no, this is definitely coming with me. So of course, this was written and published in 1967. I'm not sure how many of these there are. I want to say that it's maybe somewhere between 5 and 10, I would guess. But now that I found this one, I definitely will have to try and track down the rest of them because I absolutely adore and grew up on this series. Moving on to biographies, I found this 2005 biography of Warren Beatty by Suzanne Finstad. So I'm interested in reading this and then comparing it to the Peter Biskind Beatty biography that I already have and have read. It's a nicely sized hardcover tome. It's got some definite weight to it, and the actual cover and blurbs seem rather nice. So I will admit I am a sucker for biographies when they are ultra cheap, and I'm always trying to figure out which one is the best biography to read, because you do want to read a good biography and not finish it and realize you need to read a different one because it's more accurate or better constructed or has more information. And again, this one is from 2005, so it does obviously run up to the later part of his career. So should be rewarding to read this and then compare it to the Peter Biskind biography. I really like this photo just inside the title page and the quote used. Next up is a really fantastic looking volume. This is Roger Ebert's diary and recollections of one of his many trips to the Cannes Film Festival, entitled 2 Weeks in the Midday Sun. It's also got a lot of really nice personal illustrations and things, and of course, anything Ebert ever wrote. If I haven't read it already, I really want to read it, and his lesser-known books and publications are also just as rewarding as his more well-known and well-read texts. So I had known of this, but just had never gotten a chance to read it. This is a second printing, I believe, from 1988 in terms of the paperback, but a really nice little memoir volume that I've just been wanting to read for way too long. And then even on the front cover is printed I believe it's a little hand-drawn map of all the hotspots and locations of sort of living in Cannes for the duration of the film festival. So as you can see, it's definitely a funny, quirky, very personal memoir of that sort of experience of going to Cannes at that period of time in the 80s. Next is a really nice copy of Sterling Hayden's autobiography entitled Wanderer. I've wanted to read this for a long time. There's a nice extra little introduction I believe Hayden did a number of years after the original book was published in the 60s, I think. Again, this is a later printing, I believe, from 2000 or so. But this is a nice, weighty tome, and Hayden is such a fascinating character, and how his career ended, him essentially walking away from Hollywood and film stardom to essentially sail the world aboard a boat. It's just so many interesting things in terms of his personal life and his character. So I've always wanted to read this in his own words. And it is, even in paperback form, it is a rather weighty tome. And I was just very excited to find this in a used shop. So I can't wait to dig through this. Next up is a volume entitled Focus on Hitchcock. This is a 1972, I believe, Prentice Hall book on Hitchcock and his films and his career. This was really when the critical adoration of Hitchcock was finally starting to ramp up. And of course, after I believe after the first version of Hitchcock Truffaut had come out. And of course, if there's any book on Hitchcock and I haven't read it or I don't have a copy of it and I find it and it's affordable, of course, I can't not buy it and read it. So even though I never know if it's going to have information that I haven't come across before, I still want to read it because I'm that much of a Hitchcock fanatic. I have to read every Hitchcock book that is available. So this, it's got a little bit of wear, but it was a very inexpensive, rather nice looking volume. And again, what's really cool is stamped here in the corner is this was originally purchased at the iconic Larry Edmunds bookshop in Hollywood, California, which is where you wanted to go to get your film books back in the old days. So again, this was printed by Prentice Hall in the early 70s, and it basically has individual pieces on Hitchcock's career, and then in the center there are some rather nice black and white stills in the photo section. So, as always, if there's any volume on Hitchcock, whether it be historical or critical or analysis, I have to read it at some point. So this was a no-brainer for me to pick up. Next up is a paperback reprinting of John Baxter's Stanley Kubrick biography, which was published in 1997, and I read it a number of years ago when I first read the Labruto Kubrick biography, and but it's been so long I can't really remember much about this one. If I'm understanding it correctly, I believe the reputation is the Labruto biography is a bit better, but I'm interested to reread this and then compare it to the other, and because those are really the two primary Kubrick biographies to this day in terms of doing his full life up to the point in which they were written. And of course, this coming out in '97 is before the release of Eyes Wide Shut and before his death in 1999. So basically gets you all the way up to just before that point. But it'll be interesting to reread this, and it was a rather inexpensive, decent enough condition paperback, which has the same art as the original hardcover that I read a number of years ago in a library. And of course, as a Kubrick fanatic, I also have to have every book on Kubrick I can get my hands on, even if I don't really remember much about reading it in the first place. Next up is Shirley MacLaine's 2016 memoir, Above the Line, which was, it's basically surrounding the making of a particular film, I believe called Wild Oats. And I enjoyed her other memoirs, and of course, she's one of my favorite actresses of all time. And I also really enjoyed memoirs that are about specific film productions, so it's sort of a time capsule of sort of the madcap things that happen during any film production. So again, this was an immediate. I'm going to get this because I really want to read this after reading some of her other memoirs. Next up is the 1985 biography, The Other Side of the Moon, which is a biography of the iconic David Niven, written by Sheridan Morley, who apparently was a longtime personal friend of Niven's. And I have read the later biography, which I believe is simply entitled Niv, That was really great, but it's been a long time since I've read that. And I've meant to check this one out. I think this was really the first major biography about Niven's entire life. And of course, it really helps in terms of David Niven, who was well known for telling some of the best life stories and Hollywood anecdotes, and nothing could get in the way of a good story. So, actually learning his real biographical details outside of things in his purported autobiography, "The Moon's a Balloon." He wrote 2 volumes actually, and those are absolutely incredible must-reads and fantastic. But they didn't always necessarily tell the at times more sad or realistic, or the real truth of the scenario, in order to make the story more entertaining. So that's why it's really important to have well researched and accurate biographies of Niven in particular. So, of course, I'm interested to check out this particular biography. And again, you can't have enough David Niven in your life. He's one of the most fascinating, not just actors, but people, I think, who ever really lived. And if you ever have had the fortune to listen to archive interviews with Niven, or when he would make various talk show appearances, when he would tell some of these anecdotes and stories, I mean, they're just absolutely riveting. So, again, you can't have enough Niven in your life. And then last for biographies and memoirs, this is the 2015 Burt Reynolds memoir entitled But Enough About Me. I wanted to read this since it came out. I just never got around to it. So finding this cheap paperback copy meant I'm finally going to get around to reading this, because it just looked and sounded fascinating enough. And Reynolds has always been a very underrated actor, I think. He really had great promise as an actor and was never quite taken seriously in a lot of ways, and then would take bigger paychecks and do bigger films and things. But I think both the industry and in some ways he himself kind of sold himself short. So that's why it was so welcome, and it's great that he did sort of have a sort of, not really a career comeback, but it was a career comeback in ways, when he had the great dramatic turn in Boogie Nights in the late 90s. Next up from 2014 is Carrie L's wonderful memoir of the making of The Princess Bride. And of course, it's cult status and intensive fandom, and of course, the everything that's happened in the years since its release in the 1980s. So I wanted to read this ever since it came out, but it just, again, never got around to it until finding this really nice hardcover copy. It's got some nice texturing on the jacket as well, and the art design looks great. And of course, there is a nicely colored photo section in the center of the book. Next up is the official companion volume to the Guild web series, which was started back in 2007, I believe, long before doing actual web series had become much of a mainstream thing. Let alone, this was really long before the early days of the rise of streaming content, and really, it sort of goes hand in hand with how the industry was already changing, and of course all this has become insanely accelerated over the past decade, especially. So of course this really goes into the production of the web series, and goes hand in hand with basically independent film production, and doing things much more in the fashion that is done now. The web series itself is still enjoyable. I go back to it every once in a while. It's wonderfully quirky and very realistic, and the characters are so well drawn. Definitely going far beyond what could have been done in a official sitcom as a network sitcom, which I believe was the original way that Felicia Day, the creator of the series, tried to sell it. And of course, no network would really buy into it, so she turned to the internet, and that was really sort of in the early days again of trying to do a web series. And it was interesting to see this series sort of grow over time, and it still has a cult following and a good strong fan base. So it was really nice to find this volume that again goes into more of the production side of how the series was made and how it grew even within its multi-season run over the couple years that it was made. And like any, independent volume, it's definitely not easy to find this particular book these days. So it was a very welcome find to just see it, shoved in the back of the TV cinema section in my local used bookstore. And it's like, wait, what? Is that what, is that what I think it is? Yes. Next up, to close this video, I have several volumes in relation to Spielberg titles. So, of course, I have the 2012 reprinting of the expanded version of the iconic Jaws log written by Carl Gottlieb, the co-screenwriter of Jaws. And it goes without saying, the Jaws log is one of the absolute most iconic making of film books ever published. If you have not read the Jaws log and you are at all into learning about how films are made, or even in the film industry yourself, you're doing yourself a disservice. It is one of the iconic 5 or 10 film books out there. It is one of those volumes where it is essentially film school within a paperback. This is a later reprinting of the expanded version that gives a great deal more text. Gottlieb writing, years after the massive success of Jaws and adding essential content to the original paperback volume. So if you do pick up the Jaws log, make sure that you get one of the expanded versions, because there is a great wealth of added material, and there's so much material out there still that you could essentially make a whole second volume. That he did actually wind up doing a Jaws log 2 in relation to the sequel, Jaws 2. So this is a later trade paperback printing, again from 2012. I've just been meaning to get a good copy of the expanded version because, unfortunately, I've never owned Jaws log in print before. And this is a nice, easily readable volume that, again, has all the additional content in a nice updated package. Next is a volume entitled Watching Skies, talking about, the effect of Spielberg's films and, of course, Star Wars as well, which is usually tied in. And, of course, Lucas and Spielberg became very quickly tied to one another. But this is written by Mark O'Connell, who wrote the great memoir Catching Bullets, about being a James Bond fan, which I have read and really did enjoy. So I'm very interested to read his book on the whole effect of Lucas and Spielberg, especially in the late 70s and throughout the entirety of the 1980s. So this book, of course, covers not just Star Wars, but also E.T. and Close Encounters, and I'm sure we'll delve into Indiana Jones as well. So it was very surprising finding this for cheap in the local used bookshop. So again, I'm very excited to read this and see how it compares to the great Catching Bullets memoir. And then last, but certainly not least, is the absolutely fantastic reference volume, The Complete Making of Indiana Jones, released in 2008. This is the companion volume to the great J.W. Rensler's Making of Star Wars trilogy books. This was done while those were being done. I believe this came out after Making of Star Wars, but before Making of Empire Strikes Back. This was done to tie into the release, obviously, of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but this book wound up coming out in 2008. This is the paperback volume, and by paperback, I just mean it's soft cover, but it's still just a giant tome. But what makes this extra special is, of course, I have read all of J.W. Rensler's making-ofs, at least most of them, but almost always I've read them in libraries because the books themselves are very expensive and are still very expensive on the used market. And I wanted to get them in hardcover someday, but I just haven't gotten around to it. But then, unfortunately, very sadly, Rinsler himself just passed away very recently of cancer. And almost as soon as that was announced, I stumbled across this copy of The Making of Indy. And it was just sort of serendipitous in that way because that was such terrible, sad news because he really is one of the truly great archivist historians for these films and getting this material that had never really been exposed to the public and putting together these absolutely essential reference works. If you haven't read his Making of Star Wars, Making of Empire Strikes Back, Making of Return of the Jedi, Making of Indiana Jones, he did a book on the Alien series. He more recently did a book on Planet of the Apes, which I'm dying to read. Even though the price tags are up there, these books are so incredible and some of the absolute best making of books that have ever been written and compiled. So it is a great, great loss that he's no longer with us and died at a relatively younger age. So while it was extremely sad to hear that news, again, it's very serendipitous, I think, that lo and behold, I finally stumbled across an affordable copy of one of his great works. So that's why it's a bit sad coming to this, but I am excited to reread this because I haven't gone back to this really since, probably about 2009 or so when I read it in the library. It's just been on my to get list along with the his other works for so long. And of course, he did books on other films, and he did a great book on the making of Revenge of the Sith, which is also essential. All his books are must-owns, must-reads, and you're going to return to them millions of times. So this is done in the same soft cover style as The Making of Star Wars, so it will match if you get these in soft cover. You do get definitely a bit of savings in doing so, but you will have to be sure to keep your spine safe because these are quite heavy, and because of the lengthier design, it is going to be a bit more wear and tear on the spine because the pages themselves are heavier. But the quality of these is just impeccable. The image reproduction, the color, everything, and of course the text is essential because it's primarily culled from all these mostly unheard and unseen vintage interviews. So you're not always getting people 20, 30, 40 years after the fact, but you're getting their day to day on the set and around the time of the film's release and the film's production. So you're getting firsthand materials and information, but straight from the horse's mouth, and it's from not just the big names, but all kinds of various members of the cast and crew. But again, these books are just real works of art. They are full-on coffee table books for sure, but they are just jam-packed with information. There is not one bit of wasted space in these. There's not a wasted page or a wasted chapter. My only regret with this particular book is that Rinsler was not afforded the opportunity to do a book on each film of the Indy trilogy. And so you have the materials on Raiders and Temple and Last Crusade and Crystal Skull as well, even though we don't like to talk about Crystal Skull. It's all condensed into a single book, whereas Star Wars was able to get, 3 books for the entire trilogy. But still, the materials within are just indispensable. This is, one of the books you just simply have to own because you're going to come back to it so many times. And then here's the rear, which again matches perfectly with the Making of Star Wars books. So you can put all these side by side on your shelf and they match beautifully. Again, I do wish I'd been able to get this in a hardcover because they are a little bit sturdier, but almost always when you find these books used, they are really beaten up because they've just been read or used in libraries as reference books, and so many people have gone through them. So it's not only hard to find these used for a decent price, but also not totally beat up or destroyed. So it was extra special finding this. So I don't mind that it's the softcover version instead of the hardcover version, because with these books, any way you can get them, please get them. They are just indispensable, and I've been kicking myself for years that I haven't gotten these before now. So this has just encouraged me to redouble my efforts and finally get all of Rensler's other books. And it's just such a shame that he is no longer with us, because his works are just so incredibly indispensable, and will remain so for, and they've already withstood the test of time, because this is still the indie book. There is no other book that even approaches an iota of this book's importance for the films. Again, my only regret is that he didn't get to do a individual book for Raiders and Temple and Last Crusade, but still, this book is just well worth its weight in gold, or being a Peruvian fertility idol. So that does it for this particular video. A really great and interesting batch of books that I picked up over the last few months that I wanted to go over. And hopefully this gave you some new ideas for books to seek out for your own collection, or to dust books off your shelf and reread them. And it's always interesting to see what will pop up at local bookstores. And sometimes, like a number of volumes in this video, it is very serendipitous when you find or come across certain books. So with that, as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Keep supporting your local independent bookstores, help keep them in business, and help keep small businesses alive in this time. And definitely keep reading.